The movie begins in the year 1954. U.S. Marshal Teddy Daniels and his newly assigned partner, Chuck All, set out on a challenging journey across the rough sea. Their destination is the mysterious and remote Shutter Island, which is home to a mental hospital for dangerous criminals. As they travel, Teddy confides in Chuck about a personal tragedy. His beloved wife tragically died in a devastating fire that destroyed their apartment. Soon, Teddy and Chuck arrive on Shutter Island. They are met by Deputy Warden McPherson, who welcomes them to Ashcliff, the mental institution for criminally insane patients. The guards at the facility seem very tense and watchful, staring at Teddy and Chuck with suspicion. Deputy McPherson informs the marshals that they are not allowed to bring their firearms onto the island. After some hesitation, Teddy and Chuck reluctantly hand over their weapons. As they make their way to the main building, Teddy notices some patients working in the yard. One particularly unsettling old woman glares at him as he passes by. Shortly after, Teddy and Chuck are introduced to Dr. John Cawley, the head psychiatrist at Ashcliff. Dr. Cawley explains that they are there to investigate the disappearance of a patient named Rachel Solando. He reveals that Rachel had killed her 3 children by drowning them in the lake behind her house. According to Dr. Cawley, Rachel now believes that her children are still alive and has created a false reality that she never harmed them. How she managed to escape from her locked room, with its barred window, remains a mystery. While examining her room, Teddy discovers a note hidden under a floor tile. It reads, "The Law of 4, who is 67. Teddy asks to see the personnel files of all Ashcliff employees, but Dr. Cawley denies his request. The marshals then join the correctional officers who are searching for Rachel outside. Teddy suggests that Rachel might be hiding in some caves in the distance, but Deputy McPherson insists that Rachel can't have climbed down the cliff. Teddy starts questioning the orderlies about the night Rachel disappeared. He requests to speak with Dr. Sheehan, Rachel's primary psychiatrist, but learns that Dr. Sheehan left for vacation that very morning. Later, Teddy and Chuck visit Dr. Cawley at his mansion, where they share some drinks. They meet Dr. Naring, a German doctor and colleague of Cawley. During their visit, Teddy has a flashback of his time as a soldier in World War II. He sees a German officer lying in a pool of blood with a gunshot wound to his face. Teddy stops the officer from reaching for a nearby weapon and watches as the officer slowly dies from his injuries. That night, Teddy and Chuck are given beds in the orderlies' quarters. Teddy dreams about his deceased wife, who tells him in the dream that Rachel never left the island and that Laetus is also there, implying that Teddy cannot leave. Teddy wakes up to find that the storm outside has worsened. He and Chuck then have a conversation with Dr. Cawley, who talks about his belief in treating patients with respect and understanding. Teddy and Chuck begin interviewing Rachel's fellow patients to learn more about her behavior. One of the patients, Mrs. Kearns, who had previously murdered her husband with an axe, becomes very nervous when Teddy questions her about Dr. Sheehan. She asks Chuck for a glass of water, and while he is gone, she writes something on Teddy's notepad. When Teddy asks Mrs. Kearns if she knows a patient named Andrew Laetus, Chuck returns with the water, and Mrs. Kearns seems to pretend to drink it rather than drink. Outside, Chuck and Teddy discuss Andrew Laetus. Teddy explains that Laetus was responsible for the apartment fire that killed his wife and that Laetus had mysteriously disappeared from Ashcliff, leaving no trace. Teddy believes Laetus might be held in Ward C, where the most dangerous patients are kept. Teddy admits that he chose to investigate Rachel's case to find Laetus. As the storm continues to rage, Teddy and Chuck seek shelter in an old mausoleum. Teddy recounts his experiences during World War II, including liberating the Dachau concentration camp. He tells Chuck that he and his fellow soldiers lined up surrendering Germans and executed them. Teddy also shares his suspicion that sinister experiments are being conducted on patients at Ashcliff. He mentions a former patient named George Noyes, who had informed him about these experiments. Teddy and Chuck confront Dr. Cawley, asking if there's a 67th patient at Ashcliff. Dr. Cawley insists there are only 66 patients and adds that Rachel Solando has been found. They speak with Rachel, hoping to learn where she has been hiding. Teddy and Rachel share an emotional moment. Back in Dr. Cawley's office, Teddy seems to be experiencing a severe migraine and is given some pills to ease the pain. Teddy and Chuck go to the basement, which is being used as a storm shelter. Teddy notices the wardens watching him from a distance, and they do not seem pleased by his presence. That night, Teddy has a disturbing nightmare involving a dead little girl from Dachau. The girl rises and tells Teddy, "You could have saved me. You could have saved us all." Teddy then sees Andrew Laetus with a gruesome scar on his face, as he had described. The scene becomes more horrific as Teddy sees a bloodied Rachel Solando surrounded by her dead children, lying in a pool of blood. He picks up the dead girl, who opens her eyes and asks him again, "Why didn't you save me?" Teddy apologizes, saying he tried but couldn't get there in time. They suddenly appear at a lake and Teddy drops the little girl into the water. This scene is both disturbing and heartbreaking, showing how Teddy's emotional involvement in the case is taking a heavy toll on him. Teddy woke up to a scene of complete chaos at Ashcliff. The storm had caused a massive power outage, knocking out both the main and backup generators. This allowed all the patients to escape their rooms and roam freely throughout the facility. Orderlies were rushing around frantically, trying to get the patients back under control. Chuck, Teddy's partner, saw this chaos as an opportunity. He suggested that they use this time to sneak into Ward C to search for Andrew Lehane. They quietly slipped inside the ward, but suddenly, a patient leaped out in front of them. This patient, seemingly playing a cruel game, taunted Teddy and led him on a chase deeper into the ward. As Teddy pursued him, the patient ambushed him from behind. Teddy struggled, eventually overpowering the patient and attacking him fiercely. He choked the patient, but Chuck and a guard intervened, taking the patient away to the infirmary. Teddy was left alone once more. While wandering the facility, Teddy encountered George Noyes, who was still trapped at Ashcliff. George told Teddy that his presence at the facility was Teddy's fault. He warned Teddy that everything he thought he was investigating was just a game and advised him not to trust Chuck, suggesting that they had never truly worked together before. During their conversation, Teddy had another vision of his wife, Dolores. George urged Teddy to let her go, but Teddy felt he couldn't. George then revealed that Lehane might not be in Ward C, but could be in the lighthouse. Rejoining Chuck, Teddy was told that Chuck had found Andrew Lehane's intake form. Despite this information, Teddy grew suspicious of Chuck and decided to check the form later. Teddy announced he would go to the lighthouse alone. He climbed down the rocks toward the lighthouse but discovered that the tide was too high, preventing him from reaching it. When he climbed back up, Chuck was nowhere to be seen. Teddy noticed a lit cigarette at the cliff's edge and looked over, only to find Chuck's body missing. Next, Teddy saw dozens of rats emerging from a small hole in the ground. He spotted a cave with a light glowing from inside and decided to investigate. Braving the rat-infested rocks, Teddy climbed into the cave and encountered the real Rachel Solando. Rachel, who had once been a doctor at Ashcliff, revealed that she had never had children. She explained that she had questioned large shipments of psychotropic drugs and the experiments being conducted, including the transorbital lobotomy. Rachel compared these experiments to the horrific ones performed on Jews by the Nazis. She told Teddy that they had been drugging his food, coffee, and even cigarettes. Everyone at Ashcliff knew about these experiments. Before leaving the cave, Teddy asked Rachel if she had seen Chuck. Teddy then managed to get a ride back to Ashcliff from the warden. The drive was awkward, and once back at the facility, Teddy spoke with Dr. Cawley, inquiring about Chuck. This led to a major plot twist. Dr. Cawley informed Teddy that he had never had a partner and had come to Ashcliff alone. Disturbed by this revelation, Teddy went to the basement and grabbed his tie. He then encountered Dr. Nang, who was reaching for a syringe. Teddy quickly seized the syringe and injected the doctor with it. He then broke into Dr. Cawley's car. Dolores appeared once more in Teddy's vision, urging him to get to the ferry. Teddy, believing that Chuck was being held hostage in the lighthouse, set his tie on fire and used it to ignite the car's gas tank. He then made his way to the lighthouse. In a dramatic scene, Teddy dove into the water and swam to the lighthouse. He sneaked up on a guard, took his rifle and knocked him out. Teddy climbed to the top of the lighthouse and broke through the door. Inside, he found Dr. Cawley sitting calmly behind a desk. Dr. Cawley told Teddy that his rifle was empty. Teddy confronted Dr. Cawley about his meeting with Rachel Solando and the experiments happening on Shutter Island. Dr. Cawley revealed a shocking twist. Rachel Solando was another of Teddy's hallucinations. Teddy, in reality, was the 67th patient at Ashcliff. His real name was Andrew Lehane. Cawley explained that Teddy had been a patient at Ashcliff for almost 2 years. Teddy had killed his wife after she drowned their 3 children. Dr. Cawley showed Teddy that the names Edward Daniels and Andrew Lehane, as well as Rachel Solando and Dolores Chanel, were anagrams, meaning they used the same letters. This was the rule of 4 that had been mentioned earlier. Dr. Cawley explained that Teddy had created a false reality to avoid facing his crimes, believing himself to be a U.S. Marshal solving a case. Chuck then entered the room, revealing himself to be Dr. Lester Sheehan, Teddy's primary psychiatrist. It was revealed that the case of the missing Rachel Solando was an elaborate role play designed to help Teddy come to terms with his actions. Dr. Cawley warned Teddy that if this experiment failed, he would be lobotomized. Teddy, in a state of aggression, grabbed a firearm from the table and attempted to shoot Dr. Cawley, only to discover that the gun was a toy. Teddy physically attacked Dr. Sheehan but stopped when confronted with photos of his deceased children. A flashback revealed the tragic events leading to Teddy's current state. Teddy, a U.S. Marshal, had returned home to find his wife Dolores had drowned their 3 children. Overcome with grief, he tried to revive them and then laid them out side by side. Dolores had suggested turning them into dolls and expressed her love for Teddy. In his anguish, Teddy shot Dolores, her body soaked in blood. Returning to the present, Andrew woke up in a bed wearing patient clothes. He realized that the person posing as Rachel Solando had actually been a nurse. Dr. Cawley questioned him again, and Andrew accepted the truth. He admitted that he had created a false reality because he could not bear the truth of his wife's actions. He felt responsible for their deaths because he failed to get Dolores the help she needed. Andrew confessed that his real name was Andrew Lehane and that he had murdered his wife in the spring of 1952. In the film's final scene, we see Andrew and Dr. Sheehan sitting in front of the steps of the main building. Andrew once again calls the doctor Chuck and says that they have to find a way off the island. Dr. Cawley, visibly disappointed, says something to Dr. Naring, and the warden motions for the orderlies. We see several orderlies start to approach Andrew, one of them seemingly holding surgical tools. Andrew looks to Chuck and in the film's final line, asks Chuck if it would be worse to live as a monster or to die as a good man. Andrew then stands up, seemingly at peace, and walks off with the doctors and the orderlies. The film's final shot is that of the lighthouse, which implies that Andrew was lobotomized at the end. With that, the movie ends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching. See you next time.